And we are back with more News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petronas Show. We have Angelo Isidorou on the show. And one of the things that I noticed about Angelo recently, he was tweeting about a lot of the polling that was out recently. There was a Leger poll. There was another sort of cumulative poll of a bunch of different polls that has the Conservative Party in the lead by in the 5% range. Obviously, when you're talking about relatively limited sized polls, but you've got a number of polls by people like Nanos as well as Leger. And so I was really looking forward to getting Angelo's take on it. Angelo, by the way, has a terrific podcast. You should check it out today. It's Cancel This. Tell us a little bit about your podcast before we get going, Angelo.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Mark. Yeah, Cancel This is a politics and culture podcast. I speak to all sorts of interesting people that are far more interesting than myself. And we dive into our crazy political climate that we live in, this clown world, this circus that we all inhabit nowadays. So we get into the culture wars. And in addition to that, we get into politics. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today. I've been looking at some of this data. I'm a massive nerd when it comes to polling data. So it's really we've had three major polls in the past 24 hours here. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, we're looking at now the federal polling. CPC at 34%. We're looking at the Liberals at 28%. NDP 23%. Then you're looking at Bloc, People's Party, and the GPC, Greens, I guess, right? And so, all right. So, what struck you about this? I mean, as I look at that on the face of it, a drop of 5 points by the Liberals kind of stands out. What do you think?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that stands out is the fact that the Trudeau Liberals are now below 30%. This is a party that has struggled to maintain their government. They haven't been able to retain or regain their majority since 2015. And what this tells us is that Canadians are really done with them. It also tells us that NDP voters are, practically done with this little coalition that they have going. For the past year now, they've basically said, look, we're not going to have any election until 2025. We have an agreement. We're going to get universal dental, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they haven't gotten any of that. And I know a lot of NDPers are being motivated and quite angry with Trudeau as of late. So the NDP is surging. The Trudeau Liberals are collapsing in the polls, at least in the Leger poll, but that was corroborated by all these other polls as well. And in addition to that, the Conservatives are 34%, which is what they got in the general election. But compared to the last Leger poll, they jumped, I believe, by 6 points since electing Pierre Poilievre. So they're on the upswing as well, despite the fact that now they're basically back to where they were on election day. But if that Leger poll, for example, was the election day result, you would have the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada, with the plurality of seats.
Right, probably a minority type of situation, since you got to have around 39%, 38, 39% in order to get the majority. And obviously, it all depends on where you get those seats. But you make a great point about the NDP, because you look at that poll, and yeah, the Liberals are losing 5 points. The NDP is up 5. And so if I'm Jagmeet Singh and I'm looking at that poll, I'm thinking, well, why am I supporting the Liberals if they're on their way down and we're the beneficiaries of their falling numbers? Maybe it's time to go to the polls. I mean, is it possible that when you have the NDP looking at these numbers, they're thinking, you know what, we're in a position to do fairly well if we go to the polls right now? Does he start to revisit the idea of this ongoing coalition with the Liberals?
Yeah, I think Jagmeet Singh is getting hungry again for a number of reasons. One of them is some time has passed. Their war chest is beginning to fill up again. The NDP was in severe debt in the last election. But the other reason is the Liberals have not stayed true to their coalition promise with them. And then in addition to that, Mark, there have been multiple Liberal MPs, although anonymously, who have said that given the election of Pierre Poilievre, the Liberals perhaps need to pivot back right to make sure that Pierre and the Conservatives don't take all those centrist voters that are concerned about inflation. So if the Liberal Party is going to begin pivoting away from wokeism, which I think they might, the NDP is in this position where they're feeling existential, and they're feeling threatened, and they're feeling hungry for an opportunity to, perhaps go back to the Jack Layton years.
Is it too early to gauge the popularity of Pierre Poilievre and his success early on as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada? Let's listen here. A little bit of question period. Pierre Poilievre standing up, looking very confident and dapper, preparing to ask a question.
They've worked to double the price of housing in this country and give us the second worst housing bubble of any country on planet Earth. Now, Canadians have had the cost they must pay for monthly housing bills go from 32% of their paycheck to 50% of their paycheck. And what's the Prime Minister's solution? To reduce their paychecks by taking a bigger bite out of them with higher payroll taxes. And he wants to raise gas taxes, home heating taxes, and indirectly the price of groceries by tripling the carbon tax. Will the government cancel these tax hikes so that Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and house themselves?
Mr. Speaker, throughout this session, you're going to see two competing visions. One, where our government focuses on the needs of Canadians, Conservatives telling the country that they're on their own. Just today, we introduced two pieces of legislation that will add $500 top up on housing, that will double the GST credit, that will put in place a Canada dental benefit. Mr. Speaker, these are targeted measures to Canadians who need it the most, when they need it the most, and our hope on this side of the aisle is that the Conservative Party will support us to get these measures to people as soon as they need it.
Yeah, you can file that under fat chance. But there's Randy Bizanet filling in for Justin Trudeau, who conveniently, all right, he did have a funeral to go to, and then he has other events he must attend. All right, so Pierre Poilievre hammering away at the economic issue, and the Liberals sounding like they're responding here. We're going to put $500, to help here, and this dental plan. It's not exactly what the NDP wanted, to your point earlier, but is it possible that the Liberals may be able to chip away at the support that the Conservatives are getting on the economic front? Because it looks like they are focused right now at trying to do something. I mean, I don't think they care about Canadians' capacity to afford groceries and pay their bills, but I think that they have to do that given the hemorrhaging of support. Talk a little bit about the economy issue and how the Conservatives have been managing to erode support from longtime Liberals who now are starting to think, you know what, if we want help on the economic file, we may have to look at the Conservatives.
Yeah, correct. So when we talk about, the suburban mothers that live in the GTA area, they're the ones that go and get the groceries. They're the ones that fill up the minivan. And right now, their biggest issue is inflation in the economy. And for years, many of them have voted for the Liberals, but now the chickens have come home to roost. And 14% of Canadians, which is the highest amount in this Nanos poll, say that jobs and the economy is their biggest issue. Inflation is at 12%. COVID is at 1%. Nobody cares anymore. That is the new reality we're in. So while Trudeau focuses on Arrive Can and stoking fear, he's only appealing to 1% of Canadians. Most Canadians right now that have taken, that are being polled are concerned about economic issues. And that's why they're so worried. The Liberals are so worried about Pierre Poilievre, as are the NDP, by the way. The NDP today released a campaign ad, an attack ad against Pierre Poilievre, saying that he's not in it for you. He's in it for the CEOs and the elites. It's really fascinating to see the NDP doing that, because we know that the data shows that there is a percentage of NDP voters that have left the party and are going to Pierre Poilievre because of his discussion on housing, not living in your mom's basement for the rest of your life, having some ownership over your life, getting rid of, corporate welfare and the elites. So I think we're going to see both the Trudeau Liberals and the NDP viciously attack Pierre Poilievre. However, if we look at the data again from Abacus data, for example, his likability is going up. Now, mind you, his disapproval rating, that's Pierre Poilievre's, his disapproval rating is also going up. He's a polarizing figure, but his disapproval rating is not as high as O'Toole's. In fact, if we look at the Nanos poll, where they did the Leger poll, where they did a preferred prime minister polling, Trudeau was at 24, God only knows how, and Pierre was at 21. So this is actually, to conservatives listening, they'll say, well, how could that be? But this is actually an incredible result for conservatives, because typically, I mean, when O'Toole was in power as the leader, this was in the negatives. And now you're within striking distance of being the preferred prime minister for the majority of Canadians. So Pierre is absolutely on his way. The polling shows that on multiple polls. The Nanos poll showed the Conservatives surging, and it showed the same thing as the Leger poll in the sense that the NDP is also surging. So it's really quite something to see all of this data come together this week and corroborate the value of having a leader. For months and months, the Conservatives have not had a leader, and they've stayed competitive in polling, but we can see a bump pretty much immediately the moment Pierre became leader. This whole narrative of how he's never going to appeal to anyone outside the base has been completely dispelled by this data. The Conservatives are not at majority territory, but they're certainly within striking distance right now.
Yeah, and the fact that the NDP is launching an attack ad on Pierre Poilievre speaks to the fact that Poilievre has managed to chip away at more of the working class type of voters. I know some of them personally who are extremely upset and angry with the NDP's ongoing support. The fact that they opposed the trucker convoy. And let's have a look at this ad by the New Democrats. There's something you should know about the real Pierre Poilievre. He's in it for CEOs, not you. Let's listen. Who is the real Pierre Poilievre? It says he is not in it for you. Here are some things you should know. Big business. He's a friend of big business and corporate elites. He's received big contributions from those who profited off the housing crisis. Is that true? I mean,
well, who knows, right? I mean, I don't see any receipts here, but
he's received big contributions. First of all, we don't have the giant type of corporate donations that say some people are making to the Trudeau Foundation. We have rules about big contributions.
$1,600 is the maximum. So maybe for the NDP, maybe $1,600 is a big contribution. I don't know. I know their fundraising hasn't been great, but
I think he might be talking about construction companies. Companies, especially in the GTA area.
Right.
They have certainly gravitated towards the Conservatives' message of economic strength for the middle class, rather than higher taxes. So maybe that's what they're talking about, the thinking that somehow big construction companies and contractors are benefiting from the housing crisis. Well, if the housing crisis involves not having enough homes, right? And you've got record numbers of people being brought in through immigration, then maybe in some perverse way that they are benefiting. I don't know. Let's watch the rest of this. He's voted against CEOs pay what they owe.
Very, very, a lot of mental gymnastics in that language. Paying what they owe. Interesting.
And he's voted against the minimum wage. I think they packaged the minimum wage increases. I suppose, but is that a provincial thing? I mean, I've seen provinces. I could be wrong about that.
Well, again, we're not seeing any sources. We're not seeing any receipts on any of this.
No. What else have they got here? Twice. Oh, he twice voted against Pierre Poilievre. He's not in it for you. So I guess that gives us an idea of what their election campaign. But I think I agree with what you said earlier about the fact that it is interesting that the NDP is going after Poilievre because they've crunched their own numbers. And you look at some of those seats in places like British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, in Northern Ontario, where you've got seats in which you've got Conservatives and New Democrats pounding away at those seats. In some cases, Liberals are not really huge players up there. It's often between the New Democrats and the Conservatives. And there are swing voters that often will go back and forth depending on who the prime minister is or who the leader of the party is and so forth. And so I think it's fascinating that the NDP now sees Pierre Poilievre is a force to be reckoned with in many of those seats where maybe they are now in possession of a seat. What do you think, Ange?
Well, I'm just glad the NDP is doing something. Frankly, I mean, obviously as a conservative, I would have liked it if they chose to attack Justin Trudeau. But the NDP has basically been this lapdog zombie party for years now, and they haven't really been trying. So I'm glad that they got a video editor, and I'm glad that they're trying. And like you said, if we look at areas of British Columbia, especially Vancouver Island, particularly, the Liberals are not even a factor there. The Liberals in some ridings on Vancouver Island are in fourth place behind the Greens. It's really the Conservatives and the NDP that fight on Vancouver Island. And Pierre Poilievre sold thousands and thousands of memberships. He held a rally in Nanaimo in British Columbia, which is on Vancouver Island, with thousands of people in attendance. This is one of the most orange NDP strongholds in Canada. Just in terms of the area, and he has thousands of people coming out. So I think they're afraid that the union worker, the blue collar worker, the single mom that's struggling is not necessarily interested in hearing about how many genders there are. They're interested in making money and having economic security. So this new, woke NDP is not, it's not your Jack Layton's NDP. It's not talking for that type of Canadian anymore. It's now the Conservatives that are.
Angelo Isidorou joining us on Saga at 960, coming to us from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. I want to ask you about you've touched on it, you've got this woke issue, of course, but there's the bozo eruptions. The fact that we're living in a time when Canadians are really genuinely concerned about the economy, bread and butter issues, they're struggling. Maybe in good times you can afford to take a flyer on a guy like Justin Trudeau, get him in there. How much damage can he do? Well, now we know. But at a time when there are some very serious problems, you don't need a buffoon in there. You don't need somebody who's unserious. You don't need somebody who's doing the kind of things that Justin is doing, perceived largely as a bit of a clown on the world stage. And of course, we all know that the latest now being, as Senator Leo Housakos notes, poor judgment from Justin Trudeau has become a pattern. Blackfacing, thank you for your donation, ethnocentric behavior on international trips, bowing before Iranian foreign minister, and partying on the eve of a state funeral. Certainly not gone unnoticed by the likes of the Telegraph. Have we reached a point now where Canadians are thinking, the joke's over. We need a grown-up in there. To what degree is that a factor in your view?
Yeah, I think that's playing a role. When people can't afford groceries, they can't afford gas. I think, the time for the pretty boy, the good times have come to an end and the pretty boy must go. But I think this was just another example of that, where on the eve of the funeral of probably one of the most important figures historically, certainly in the 20th century, he's singing and having a great time. This is a funeral where there's 500 state dignitaries, probably every most important politician, ambassador, any important figure you can imagine on the planet is in London right now, where he is. And they're sending their best to represent their countries as they mourn the passing of Her Majesty. And this is our guy. This is the guy we send. So we are a joke on the international stage. And what's sad is that internationally that's the case, and you see the Telegraph and BBC and all these news outlets talking about his deplorable behavior. But in Canada, our state broadcasters are keeping it hush hush. They report about it, but they don't make it obvious. They don't want the people here to know what a joke our great leader is. It's a North Korean type of media landscape. And it's just really disrespectful. I mean, I'm not going to clutch my pearls and say, how dare he? I'm not this diehard monarchist. But I think when you're invited to attend the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, probably there'll never be another figure like that in your lifetime, maybe ever. And you're sitting there singing in public, right? I mean, it's just so disrespectful.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think Canadians are hearing about it. I mean, anybody who's on social media, for instance, is going to find out about this. And I take your point. You've had some people with mixed feelings about that. He was out having a good time, probably feeling no pain. But there is an element of decorum that you expect in an event like this that you have to maintain. And if you're clowning yourself, then it looks bad not only on yourself, but it looks bad on the country that you represent for having elected a guy like that. I can't imagine that Stephen Harper, even though he's a much better musician and singer than Justin Trudeau, would have ever done something like that. So it just looks bad on the country. And so maybe it's time Canadians are looking at this and going, enough of this. We've had 7 years of it. It's time to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Pierre Poilievre represents that adult in the room that does the budgeting. He gets a lot of flack from leftists who say that he's so analytical and aggressive and sort of, nerdy in many ways. But at the end of the day, when you're going into what will be probably an austerity or probably a period of economic recession, you need someone that has an economist mindset like a Stephen Harper, who is, very necessary for the time. You need an adult who maybe doesn't put on the wedding outfit and dances around in India, who doesn't sing ballads at the Queen's funeral, right? I mean, you need to have a certain level of decorum, and I don't think drama teachers are best suited for it.
Yeah, I think he clowned himself. But what if you're the Liberals? What do you do? I mean, do you focus on attacking Justin Trudeau? What's going to be their strategy?
If you're the Liberals, you mean the Conservatives?
No, I mean, say put yourself in the position of the Liberals right now. You see the Conservatives surging. You see the Conservatives energized. We've seen what the NDP is doing. They're going to focus all their bullets on the fact that, well, yeah, allegedly isn't for the average person. He's for CEOs. Will the Liberals take a similar tack, do you think, in terms of going after Poilievre?
I mean, if we look at the modern landscape of how the left operates in 2022, it's almost exclusively ad hominems. There's no policy discussions. I don't expect Trudeau to come out and talk about, Pierre's tax bracket policy and how he disagrees with it for X, Y, and Z. I think it is going to be actually a lot more aggressive than the NDP. The NDP surprisingly didn't outright defame him. But I fully expect, whether it's Trudeau or Freeland or whichever Liberal to come out and try to push these ridiculous narratives about bigotry and racism, xenophobia. I think they're going to try and take that tact because they really don't have much else. If we look at polling, Canadians trust Conservatives more when it comes to the economy. So having a Liberal attack a Conservative over the economy does not seem conducive to anything. All they can do is just try to cover the Conservatives in so much mud that you just don't want to touch them. They're just too toxic.
What about this Trudeau must go hashtag? I mean, not everybody's on Twitter. Most Canadians are not.
Yeah.
But it seems to have made a little bit of an impact. It seems to have rattled the cage of some of the Liberals. I mean, you see people like Jerry Butts coming out and calling them bots. The PMO clearly not impressed by this. To what degree is that factoring into the Liberals' mindset these days? The fact that you have enormously popular online campaigns. I mean, 1.7 million retweets on that. That's a lot of people going on there saying they want Trudeau gone. Is that having an impact, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the majority of Canadians are not on Twitter. So, we shouldn't necessarily make a mountain out of a molehill. However, it is an interesting phenomenon. I've noticed those tweets and I've noticed them continuously on my wall. And I would say I've noticed them to a degree that I don't think I've seen before. I'm trying to think back to the past 7 years of social media. And I don't know if I'm spending more time on it now. I don't know if there's more people on it now. But I don't really remember a time when so many people were so cohesively against the prime minister. And that could be corroborated by the fact that the guy was elected with such a low percentage of the vote. But to your point, I think it has an impact. But I think more than that, it may be a signifier to liberals of, oh no, like the wave is coming to a close. There's a different wave now, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's signifying that, which is why so many liberal MPs are saying, hey, like we need to sort of get away from all this crazy stuff and maybe focus on economics.
You want to talk a little bit about the PPC, the People's Party? We see, according to this poll, down a couple of points, down to 3%. Does that tell you anything about Pierre Poilievre, the state of the People's Party, Max Bernier? What do you read from that?
Yeah, so we see that in that poll, but we also see it in the Abacus data poll, which suggests that that Maxime Bernier has a problem on his hands when Abacus data actually shows that the majority of PPC voters actually want Pierre Poilievre. They're actually in support of Pierre Poilievre, not necessarily the Conservative Party, but that is what the data shows. So, I think the PPC needs to sort of have a self-reflection on what the goal was, whether that goal was achieved, and whether it's time to move forward in a more unified way. That's more for the administration of the PPC. As PPC voters, we know that there were hundreds of thousands of people who chose not to vote for Aaron O'Toole. They chose to vote PPC, or they chose not to vote at all. I think if you take those votes and put them with the Conservatives, you're looking at 20 seats probably that they lost due to a vote split. So vote splitting is a really, really real phenomenon. The left has to deal with it because of the NDP and the Liberals. But when you're a party that really struggles to get beyond 5% and now your support is effectively collapsing, I really disagree with Mr. Bernier's position to just attack Pierre as a fake conservative and say, I'm an even more real conservative. It's like, well, you know what? We have a real opportunity here. Conservatives have a real opportunity to form government. Pierre Poilievre is a conservative. If you compare him to Aaron O'Toole or even Andrew Scheer, I mean, he hasn't pivoted. He's been hardcore conservative on all issues. I think he's the guy to do it. So I would say, to PPCers, take a chance, take a leap of faith. And if it doesn't go our way, if Trudeau wins again, then by all means, experiment with a new party. But clearly what we're seeing from the data is that PPCers are flocking to Pierre Poilievre.
So the hemorrhaging out of the Conservative Party of Canada has stopped, at least, right? And probably starting to return to the Conservative Party of Canada.
Well, I would say, in addition, I mean, the Conservative Party of Canada has the highest membership list out of any party in Canada, right? Because of how many people signed up for Pierre, the membership is the highest it's ever been, ever. So the hemorrhaging, I would say, is not only stopped, but it's completely reversed. If Aaron O'Toole won, or I should say, if Jean Charest won, we would be in a totally different situation right now. I think if Jean Charest won, we would have been seeing the PPC at 7 or 8%. That's what some of the data was suggesting. But that didn't happen. And also, that didn't happen by a lot. So a lot of PPCers who think that, the Conservatives have become the liberal light party, it's like, man, clearly they haven't. When Pierre gets 70%, not to mention Leslyn Lewis, and Roman Baber getting, 15, 16% collectively, this is a very conservative party. The issues of the past was that the leadership wasn't conservative, was that the leadership was afraid. But we saw the moment that Aaron O'Toole left the building, even caucus members, even MPs were acting more conservative. It's like it's like the reins, it's like dad's not home and you could party saying what they believe.
Yeah.
And it was so refreshing to see that. So clearly, the caucus members, the voters are all very conservative. It's just the leadership has been strategists who believe that we need to pivot left to win. And I think that narrative is dead now. I don't think anyone believes that anymore.
I hope so. But I think a lot of people maybe who have wavered in the past, gone over to the PPC, might be looking, and wary of any signs that Pierre might be wavering on some of those conservative positions, like the carbon tax. I had somebody asking me if he's going to waver on the carbon tax. What have you heard?
No, I don't think he's wavering on anything. You know, it's funny. I was talking to Chris Sims, who's with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and I asked, what was it like at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation when you had all the leadership candidates, including Aaron O'Toole, sign a gigantic cardboard cutout that was a pledge to never bring in a carbon tax, and then the guy promotes a carbon tax. And she was talking about how, the consequences of those actions are self-evident in the sense that they held his feet to the fire for being a liar, uh, and he's no longer leader. I think a lot of politicians, including Pierre, see that and understand the value of consistency. But speaking on consistency for a moment, if you ask any politician in Ottawa about Pierre, about something that everyone can agree on, it's that he has been probably one of the most consistent MPs in terms of who he has been, in terms of his beliefs. He hasn't really changed. In fact, if you look up Pierre Poilievre's graduation photo from high school, his graduation photo quote is something like "socialism is the destruction of all civilization." Like the guy has always been who he is. He just is who he is. So I don't see him pivoting. Could he change his tact? Could he be less aggressive? Maybe, I don't know. But when it comes to policy, I think you have such a huge majority of conservatives that are going to die on the hill of we need to get rid of the carbon tax. And I think that is the case more now than ever before because of the economy.
Angelo Isidorou joining us on Saga 960. Have you seen any indications that liberals are looking seriously? We spoke about this, looking seriously at voting conservative. And do you expect that the liberals will respond to that by focusing? And I'm going back a little bit to that original question about, maybe trying to tweak their economic policies a little bit, and as well as dealing with issues like ArriveCan, because now we're seeing them waver on that. Some of the liberal media, for instance, has come out, and you've seen this, Angelo,
Yeah.
talking openly about, is ArriveCan on the bubble here? And is there, they're hiring people to deal with the passport offices. So these irritants, powerful irritants, now are being dealt with more seriously by the Liberal Party of Canada. Will that be enough to bring Liberals back on side?
I think it could be. I mean, when we talk about liberals, who are we talking about? Is it enough to bring people with blue hair and piercings that think the patriarchy is evil? Are they going to be on side? No. People who hate conservatives and think they're bigoted neo-Nazis are never going to vote conservative. But your soccer moms in the GTA, or maybe ethnic communities, Sikh communities, Chinese communities in the lower mainland of British Columbia, the Surrey that votes liberal, that's always voted liberal, could they vote conservative? And I think absolutely. I mean, the data certainly shows that when we look at the membership sales. But I also think that the fact that COVID is effectively a dead issue, only 1% of Canadians care about it compared to 14% on the economy, we're going to see a lot of Canadians say, you know what, I don't like his tone, he's a little bit mean, but I think we just need Pierre Poilievre in there to just fix. I think the Conservatives just need to fix the economy because everything is so bad. I can't afford, the groceries are going up, inflation's getting worse. This prime minister wants to fight inflation by printing more money. It's just common sense. So I think you're going to have your fair weather, your fair weather liberals that will switch over. I definitely see that happening.
Wow. Angelo, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate your analysis. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Angelo Isidorou. Check out Cancel This. How do people access that terrific podcast, Angelo?
So Spotify, Google, YouTube, anywhere where you can listen to a podcast, just look up Cancel This with Angelo Isidorou and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Have you got any great guests coming up that we should look forward to?
I have a couple. I shouldn't mention anything yet. You never know if these things could go sideways.
Yeah,
but,
I hear you.
stay tuned.
Got to be careful. All right. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
Likewise.
Angelo Isidorou coming to us from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. Let's take a break. Back with more News Talk Saga 960 on the Mark Petrona Show after this.